So which brings you to Exorcism, I guess. I tried it actually. It looks cool. It's a fun place where people can learn about programming. Maybe can tell us more what is Exorcism? Do I pronounce it correctly? And what is that platform actually?
Sure, you pronounce it fine. So I would say Exercism. Exercism is a platform for improving your programming skills. Currently, we say that you need to be able to do a little bit of programming to be able to use Exercism. You don't need to be a good programmer, but we don't teach the absolute basics yet. It's something we're going to be doing, but we don't yet. It's an online platform where you can go. We have 55 different programming languages we teach. You can work through one of those programming languages. We give you various exercises to do. For a lot of tracks now, we have formal syllabuses that teach various concepts. You work your way through those concepts, very much learning how that concept applies to that language, even from something basic like understanding numbers in a language. Understanding how numbers in JavaScript are quite different to, say, numbers in Ruby or numbers in C#. You need to learn different things to be able to use numbers well in those different languages. So we tend to focus on trying to teach what knowledge you need specifically for a language. And we teach what we define as fluency. So the idea that you can speak fluently in that language, you can think fluently in that programming language. What we don't teach is proficiency. So we don't focus on, say you're learning JavaScript. We want to make you able to think like a JavaScript developer, to understand the intricacies of JavaScript, understand how to use JavaScript well. But we wouldn't go and teach you a framework like React or something like that on the side that explains how you would use JavaScript in the real world. So to give you an idea of scale, we've got just under a million users. And one of the key elements of Exercism is that it's centered around mentoring. So you solve exercises, but then you send them to our team of volunteer mentors. And those mentors will read your code and they will give you feedback on it and give you ideas as to how to improve. We center around this idea that you don't know what you don't know. So when you're learning something, it's very hard to identify your own knowledge gaps. It's very hard to know if you're doing something wrong, especially if you're a programmer and you're moving from one language to another. It can be quite difficult to know whether, am I just applying my JavaScript knowledge when I'm writing Ruby, or am I actually writing Ruby like a Ruby developer would write? So mentors are brilliant for that. They'll come in and they will give you advice and ideas and insight on how you can improve. And they're all volunteers. You mentioned about the not-for-profit thing. Exercism's a not-for-profit platform. Everything we do is free. The platform itself is built by a huge community. We've had hundreds of thousands of mentor sessions just between the students and volunteer mentors, and millions of submissions from students. And that's the final sort of other piece of the puzzle, I guess, is that we're very focused on learning from others. So when you submit your solution, we'll show you how other people have submitted their solutions as well. And we'll let you explore other people's ideas and other people's approaches, which is also a great way to learn. I hope that's a quick overview. I could talk about Exercism all day, but hopefully that just gives a bit of color.
Sounds really exciting. Actually, you forget one more element, which is the gamification part of it. Where you have the points and the levels and all that. I think that sounds cool. So one thing that you mentioned, right? People who are learning programming languages, when they switch, they are not used to this idiomatic way of programming in a different language. Maybe tell us more. Why is it important to have more idiomatic way of programming?
Sure. So idiomatic programming is everything. If you're going to go and work on a team with a load of Java developers, you need to be writing Java in the way that Java developers write Java. You need to be able to think about the way that programs are structured, or if you're moving from a language that's compiled to interpreted, you'll do things differently, or that has automatic memory management or doesn't. Languages are, just like human spoken languages, very different. If you don't learn the fundamentals of a language very well, then that will always shine through. Good examples in spoken languages are accents. So if someone learns French as their first example, and then you hear them speak English, they'll always have this, well, it's quite a beautiful French sort of twang to their English. They've never sort of learned English as a native speaker would speak it in terms of things like accents. And that can then cause trouble, not just a French example. You know, if people have quite thick accents and other people can't quite understand what they're saying, you end up with communication barriers. If you're talking and one person's using phrases and those phrases aren't familiar to you, then that can be really confusing. Again, it's causing inefficiencies. It's causing often mistakes or misunderstandings. I'm currently learning Japanese. I've been learning it for a little while now. I'm really trying to learn the fundamentals really well. Eventually, one day when I'm good at Japanese, I want to be able to speak with a native accent. And I want to be able to not just be using English phrases that I've sort of badly butchered into Japanese, but actually learning the Japanese phrases that they would use in a native setting. And so I think it's a little bit like that. But obviously, when you're in a technical situation, you're writing technical projects, often where the risk of a mistake can be quite serious. It could be a website going down, or it could be much more serious than that. If you're working for NASA or you're doing something in medicine, those mistakes, those miscommunications can be really risky. Hopefully that gives a bit of an idea. I think there's also just a pride in learning a new language and wanting to program in it really well, wanting to be able to think like everyone else, wanting to sort of get to the top of that game. And if you're not learning those fundamentals really well, it will always be a hard thing for you to then do later on.
And also you work with people who are maybe more familiar with that language. If you wrote it in a different way, I guess you can tell, okay, this looks like two different people writing it. So you mentioned the important elements of exorcism, which is the mentorship. I'm sure some of us here, the audience, the listeners who are also learning new programming language, can you tell us what is the importance of having a mentor when you switch language, for example? Is it really important to have someone mentoring or guiding you along the way?
It's a good question. So firstly, obviously, you can learn other programming languages without a mentor. It's not a requirement, but it is hard when you're learning something to spot your own mistakes. So the phrase I mentioned earlier, you don't know what you don't know, is a really big sort of principle for me on this. You will see a new language through the eyes of your previous experience, your previous languages that you've coded in, and you might not understand that you are doing something badly. So an example is, say, people learning Rust, the programming language Rust. We have an algorithm called Pythagorean triplets. It's an exercise that you can solve, and you can solve it in a few different ways. But one of the nice things about Rust is that you can create a solution that's deeply parallelized. So the different strands of this are running simultaneously, which gives you a very, very fast answer. Normally, what we see is that people coming from other languages that don't have this parallelism built into the language, they won't use that function at all. They'll write a slower function. Maybe it'll take 10 seconds to run the whole program. Whereas when some mentor has sort of said, well, hold on, have you thought about doing this? It's quite fundamental. If you change the way you think about the program, so it's like this instead, then actually your runtime will go from 10 seconds to like 0.1 second. Often it can take quite a few iterations of somebody improving their code to really go on that journey and understand it. And there's a real light bulb moment that like clicks for somebody halfway through that exercise where they suddenly understand about that. And I think if you didn't have a mentor that was guiding you that way, it's too hard to see a fully working solution and know how to get from where your knowledge is to get to that really great solution. That chasm is too big just to jump because there's so many small little learning steps you need to go on. Whereas if you've got a mentor that's holding your hand, taking you just at one little step at a time, they can guide you there. And then when that light bulb moment comes off, you're going to really deeply understand that and remember that. So that's why I think it's so valuable. We've had lots of people who have worked through. So every time you submit an exercise as well, you get a different mentor. So we try and give students like a broad range of different ideas and different views and different people feeding into them. It's not like a one-to-one sort of mentoring program. But yeah, we've had people that have gone through a track and they will testify how much that mentoring has accelerated the way they're learning and just really given them strong foundations.
That totally makes sense. For example, for me, I'm also learning Go, for example. Go, sometimes the idiomatic way is definitely different than some of the programming languages. And not having someone and always have to refer to blogs or books actually sometimes makes it hard. You will sometimes think, okay, do I do it the right way? But then I don't have feedback, but my code works. But at the end of the day, you don't actually write it in the idiomatic way. So I think that mentorship is really powerful in that sense.